The exile ceremony had been as brutal as Embara Drakeburn had expected, though the pain of watching her own family renounce their blood ties still cut deeper than any physical wound could have managed. Standing before the assembled Dragon Council, with silver chains binding her wings and suppressing her natural fire, she listened to the final pronouncement of her fate with the stoic dignity that had defined her throughout 25 years of life among her kind. Embara, daughter of Valdris the Mighty, bearer of corrupted flame, you are hereby stripped of your title as crown princess and banished from the dragon realms, intoned Elder Korath, his ancient voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Across the great chamber carved from living mountain stone, your flame burns wrong, your magic flows backward, and your very presence among pure dragons brings shame upon bloodlines that have remained untainted for millennia. The charges against her were as familiar as they were devastating. Corrupted flame, they called it, because her fire burns silver and gold instead of the traditional crimson that marked proper dragon heritage. Backward magic, because her power seemed to heal and nurture rather than dominate and destroy as dragon magic was meant to do. Most damning of all, she was accused of being a bridge between worlds, a dangerous anomaly that threatened the careful separation between dragons and the lesser beings they ruled over. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Elder Korath asked, though his tone suggested he neither expected nor wanted a response. Embara lifted her head and met his gaze with eyes that swirled with silver fire, the same unnatural flame that had marked her as different from the moment of her birth. I have served the dragon realms faithfully for 25 years, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber despite the magical restraints that dampened her power. I have protected our territories, defended our interests, and used my gifts to strengthen our people whenever possible. If you choose to cast me out for magic I did not choose and cannot change, then so be it. But do not pretend this is justice. A murmur of unease rippled through the assembled dragons, many of whom had indeed benefited from Embara's unusual abilities over the years. When traditional dragon magic failed to heal injuries sustained in territorial disputes, her silver flame had mended broken bones and closed mortal wounds. When diplomatic relations with other supernatural species grew strained, her natural empathy had prevented conflicts that could have cost lives on both sides. But those same gifts that had made her valuable also made her frightening to dragons, who preferred their world simple and hierarchical. A crown princess with healing fire and an instinctive understanding of non-dragon perspectives was a walking reminder that their species' claim to inherent superiority might not be as absolute as they believed. Your service is noted, Elder Korath replied coldly, but it does not excuse the fundamental wrongness that flows through your veins. True dragons command through strength and inspire fear through power. Your magic does neither, marking you as something less than what you should be. King Valdris, her own father, rose from his throne with the massive presence that had made him the most feared dragon ruler in 3 centuries. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that could silence armies and topple mountains. The decision is made. Remove the chains, but ensure she understands the terms of her exile. Any attempt to return to dragon lands will be met with immediate execution. The silver restraints fell away from Embara's wings, and she flexed them carefully to restore circulation while trying to ignore the mixture of relief and terror that warred in her chest. For 25 years, she had known this day might come eventually. The Dragon Council's tolerance for her differences had been growing thinner with each passing season, and recent events had finally pushed their fear beyond the breaking point. As she prepared to leave the only home she had ever known, Embara was acutely aware of the eyes that followed her progress through the Great Hall. Some carried hatred for the anomaly she represented. Others showed relief at her impending departure, but a few held something that looked almost like regret. These were dragons who had worked alongside her, who had seen firsthand that her unusual magic was used only to help and protect, never to dominate or destroy. Embara called a soft voice from the shadows between 2 massive pillars. She turned to see Lyrale Goldwing, one of the few dragons who had ever shown her genuine friendship. Without expecting anything in return, At 30, Lyrale was 5 years older than Imbara, but had always treated her like an equal rather than the corrupted princess. Most others saw Lyrale, she replied, moving closer to where her friend waited in concealment that seemed deeper than natural shadow. Could provide. You shouldn't be seen talking to me. The council has made their decision, and associating with me now will only bring you trouble. Let them try to punish me for showing basic decency. Lyrale said with quiet fierceness that surprised Imbara. Someone needs to tell you the truth before you disappear into exile forever. What truth? Imbara asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Lyrale glanced around nervously, then stepped closer until she could speak in a whisper that only Imbara's enhanced hearing could detect. Your magic isn't corrupted or backward. It's exactly what dragon magic was meant to be before our people became obsessed with conquest and domination. The silver flame you carry is the original fire, the one that built rather than destroyed, that unified rather than separated. The revelation hit Imbara like a physical blow, reordering everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in dragon history. How do you know this? Because I've been studying the ancient texts that the council prefers to keep hidden, Lyrale replied, her voice carrying notes of discovery and barely contained excitement. Dragons weren't always the isolated rulers we are today. Thousands of years ago, we were guardians and teachers, using our power to protect and guide all supernatural beings. Your magic is what we lost when we chose fear over wisdom. Before Imbara could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made Lyrale step back into the shadows. As council guards rounded the corner to ensure the exile's departure was proceeding according to schedule, Lyrale pressed a small object into Imbara's hand. A map, she whispered urgently, showing the location of the lost archives. Everything you need to understand your true heritage is hidden there, waiting for someone with the right kind of magic to unlock its secrets. As the guards escorted Imbara toward the great gates that marked the boundary between dragon territory and the wider world, she slipped the map into her traveling pack and tried to process the implications of Lyrale's revelation. If her magic truly represented dragon heritage in its purest form, then her exile wasn't just a personal tragedy, but a symbol of how far her people had fallen from their original purpose. The journey beyond dragon lands took her through territories she had never seen before, wild spaces where ancient magic still flowed freely and creatures existed that had been driven from civilized areas by expanding supernatural empires. It was in one of these forgotten valleys that she encountered the child who would change everything about her understanding of destiny and purpose. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 years old, her small form huddled beneath an outcropping of rock that provided minimal shelter from the cold mountain wind. She was clearly human, though something about her presence made Imbara's silver fire respond with recognition and protective instinct when the child looked up at her approach. Her eyes held depths that seemed far too ancient for someone so young. Please, the girl whispered, her voice barely audible through chattering teeth. I'm lost. I don't know how to get home. Imbara knelt beside the child, her dragon senses immediately detecting the malnutrition and exhaustion that threatened to claim such a fragile life. What's your name, little one? How did you come to be alone in such a dangerous place, Maya? The girl replied, accepting the warm cloak that Imbara wrapped around her small shoulders. Bad men took me from my village. I escaped, but I've been walking for days and I can't find my way back. The mention of kidnappers sent rage flowing through Imbara's system, her silver fire responding to injustice with intensity that would have alarmed the Dragon Council. But rather than the destructive fury that traditional dragon magic produced, her flame manifested as protective warmth that immediately began healing the child's exposure and malnutrition. You're safe now, Imbara promised, lifting Maya into her arms with the gentleness that had always marked her interactions with smaller beings. I'll take care of you until we can find your family. As she built a proper shelter and prepared food from her traveling supplies, Imbara found herself thinking about the exile that had seemed like an ending just hours before. Perhaps being cast out from dragon society wasn't a punishment, but an opportunity, a chance to discover what her unusual magic was truly meant to accomplish. That night, as Maya slept peacefully beside a fire that burned with silver and gold rather than destructive red, Embara began to understand that some destinies couldn't be found within the confines of traditional expectations. Sometimes the most important journeys began only after everything familiar had been left behind. 3 days had passed since Embara found Maya, and the simple act of caring for the lost child had awakened something within her that years of royal training had never touched. As they traveled together through the wildlands beyond dragon territory, she discovered that her silver fire responded to Maya's presence with increasing strength and clarity, as if the child somehow anchored her magic in ways she had never experienced. Maya proved to be far more than a lost village girl, though it took time for the full truth to emerge. The child possessed an intuitive understanding of ancient magic that should have been impossible for someone so young, and her presence seemed to make the very air around them shimmer with potential that Embara could feel but not quite identify. "Why do your eyes glow like that?" Maya asked on their 3rd morning together, watching with fascination as Embara prepared breakfast over flames that danced with silver and gold. "My grandmother used to tell stories about people with fire in their eyes, but I thought they were just tales." "They probably were," Embara replied, though she found herself studying the child with growing curiosity. "Tell me about your grandmother. What other stories did she share?" Maya's expression grew distant, carrying sadness that seemed profound. "For someone her age, she died protecting our village from the bad men who took me. But before that, she used to say I was special, that I carried the blood of the first people who learned to speak with dragons." The words sent shock waves through Embara's consciousness, awakening memories of legends she had dismissed as ancient. Mythology. The first people, according to dragon lore, had been humans who possessed natural magic strong enough to communicate directly with dragonkind. They had served as intermediaries between species, building alliances that had lasted for millennia before being lost to war and misunderstanding. "What did these bad men want with you?" Embara asked gently, though she was beginning to suspect the answer would be more significant than random kidnapping. "They said I was the key," Maya replied, her young voice carrying confusion about concepts too large for her to fully grasp. "They needed my blood for something they called the awakening ritual. Grandmother fought them to give me time to run, but she told me to find the silver fire before they found me again." Silver fire. Embara felt her own flames pulse with recognition at words that seemed to connect directly to her deepest magical essence. "Maya, did your grandmother ever mention what the silver fire was supposed to do?" "Heal the broken places," the child recited with the precision of someone repeating lessons learned by heart. "Bring together what was torn apart. Help the guardian. Dragons remember who they were meant to be. Guardian dragons." The phrase resonated with everything Lyrale had told her about dragon history, about the original purpose their people had abandoned in favor of conquest and isolation. If Maya truly carried the bloodline of the first people, if her presence was awakening ancient connections between human and dragon magic, then their meeting was far more than coincidence. "Maya," Embara said carefully, "would you like to see something wonderful?" The child nodded eagerly, and Embara allowed her dragon form to emerge for the first time since her exile. The transformation was always breathtaking, but with Maya watching in awe rather than fear, it felt like a celebration rather than a display of dangerous power. Embara's dragon form was unlike any other of her kind, her scales shifting between silver and deep gold depending on how the light struck them. Her wings seemed to contain starlight, and when she breathed, silver fire flowed from her mouth like liquid moonlight rather than the destructive torrents that other dragons produced. "You're beautiful," Maya whispered, approaching without the slightest trace of fear. "You're exactly like grandmother described in her stories." "What stories?" Embara asked, though speaking in dragon form required careful modulation to avoid overwhelming human hearing. "About the Silver Guardian, who would return when the world needed healing most," Maya replied, reaching out to touch Embara's snout with the fearless trust that only children possessed. "She said the Silver Guardian would find the last of the first people, and together they would restore the ancient bonds." The moment Maya's hand made contact with her scales, Embara felt magic unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't the dominant force that dragon power usually represented, but something far more complex and beautiful. Images flowed between them, visions of a world where dragons and humans worked together to maintain balance, rather than competing for dominance. But their moment of connection was shattered by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, harsh voices, and the distinctive magical signatures that marked professional trackers. The kidnappers had found them, and they had brought reinforcements that included beings whose power made the air itself feel thick and dangerous. "Stay behind me," Embara commanded, her protective instincts flaring to life as she positioned herself between Maya and the approaching threat. "Whatever happens, don't let them take you." The group that emerged from the forest was larger and more dangerous than she had expected. At least 12 armed humans, 3 beings that appeared to be dark elves, and something that moved in shadows at the edge of her vision. But it was the figure at their head that made her silver fire burn with recognition and fury. Well, said a voice that carried the cultured tones of supernatural nobility mixed with corruption. That made her scales crawl. The exiled dragon princess and the blood heir, together at last. "How convenient that you've saved us the trouble of hunting you separately." Lord Malakar Voidheart stepped into the clearing, with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting whatever he wanted through force and fear. His pale features were handsome in the way that predators often were, and his dark robes seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When he smiled, Embara caught sight of fangs that marked him as something far more dangerous than an ordinary vampire. "You're the one who ordered Maya's kidnapping," Embara growled, her dragon form radiating heat that made the air around them shimmer with intensity. "What do you want with an innocent child?" "Innocent," Malakar laughed, and the sound carried harmonics that spoke of centuries spent perfecting cruelty. "That child carries the last pure bloodline of the first people, the final key needed to complete a ritual that will bind all supernatural species under my control. With her blood and your silver fire, I'll be able to reshape the magical world according to my vision." The casual way he spoke of using Maya's blood sent rage through Embara's system. That made her previous anger seem like gentle warmth. Her silver fire began to build toward something that would have impressed even the Dragon Council. But this wasn't the destructive force they would have expected. This was protective fury given form, guardian magic awakening after centuries of dormancy. "You will not touch her," Embara declared, and her words carried power that made the very ground beneath them tremble with response. "I am Embara Drakeburn, guardian of the innocent, keeper of the silver fire, and I will burn away every trace of your existence before I let you harm one hair on her head." Malakar's smile faltered slightly as he realized that the exiled princess might be more formidable than his intelligence had suggested. Bold words from someone cast out by her own kind. But even dragon fire can be overcome by sufficient preparation. He gestured to his followers, and Embara found herself facing a coordinated attack from multiple directions. Dark magic erupted from the elves' hands while the human trackers launched crossbow bolts tipped with substances that could pierce dragon scales. The shadow creature revealed itself as some kind of demon, its claws dripping with venom that could paralyze even supernatural beings. But as the battle began in earnest, Embara discovered that her magic was no longer limited by the constraints that had defined her. Throughout her life among dragons, Maya's presence seemed to unlock potential she had never accessed, allowing her silver fire to manifest in ways that defied every rule. She thought she understood about dragon abilities. Her flames didn't just burn, they healed and protected and transformed. When dark magic struck her scales, silver fire absorbed the attack and reflected it back as pure healing energy. When crossbow bolts found their mark, her flames dissolved the poison and sealed the wounds before they could threaten her fighting capability. Most remarkably, her power began to extend beyond her own form. Silver fire flowed outward to create barriers that protected Maya, while simultaneously reaching toward the attackers with offer rather than threat. Instead of trying to destroy Malakar's followers, her magic offered them choice: continue serving corruption or accept transformation into something better. "Impossible," Malakir snarled as 3 of his human trackers suddenly turned their weapons on their former allies, their eyes now glowing with silver light that spoke of purification rather than domination. Guardi. And magic was destroyed centuries ago, not destroyed, Imbara replied, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the magical foundations of reality itself. Hidden, waiting for the right moment to return. Waiting for someone who understood that true power comes from protection rather than conquest. As more of Malakir's forces fell to conversion rather than death, the vampire lord realized that his carefully planned capture had become something far more dangerous. The exiled dragon princess wasn't just defending herself and the child. She was awakening magic that could threaten everything he had worked centuries to build. This isn't over, he promised, beginning to retreat as shadows gathered around him. Like living smoke, the ritual will proceed with or without willing participants. Enjoy your victory while you can, Guardian. It will be your last. As Malakir and his remaining forces disappeared into darkness that seemed to fold reality around them, Imbara found herself looking down at Maya with growing understanding of what their meeting truly meant. The child smiled up at her with eyes that held ancient wisdom despite her youth. The silver fire remembers now, Maya said with satisfaction that seemed far too mature for someone her age. And tomorrow, others will remember too. The news of the Silver Guardian's awakening spread through the supernatural world with the speed of wildfire, carried by creatures who had witnessed the battle's aftermath and felt the ripples of ancient magic returning to life within hours of Malakir's retreat. Beings that had lived in hiding for centuries began making their way toward the remote valley, where Imbara and Maya had made their temporary camp. The first to arrive was an elderly phoenix whose molten gold feathers seemed to contain sunset itself. She landed gracefully near their campfire, transforming into an ancient woman whose eyes held the wisdom of someone who had lived through the rise and fall of empires. Silver Guardian, she said formally, bowing her head with respect that Imbara had never received even from her own dragon kin. I am Imperial Dawn Weaver, keeper of the Phoenix Archives and one of the last who remembers the old alliances. We felt your magic ignite across the realm and knew the time of prophecy had finally come. Imbara rose from where she had been tending to Maya's scrapes from their escape, her silver fire pulsing with recognition of another being whose magic was rooted in healing rather than destruction. The old alliances, before the Great Sundering, before fear drove the supernatural species apart, we worked together to maintain balance in the world, Periel explained, settling beside their fire with the careful movements of extreme age. Dragons were guardians, phoenixes were healers, the first people served as bridges between species. Your silver fire is the key that can restore what was lost. Maya looked up from the simple meal she was sharing with them, her young face bright with understanding that seemed to come from inherited memory rather than personal experience. Grandmother said the silver fire would call to all the hidden guardians. She said they would come when the world needed healing most, as if summoned by her words. More figures began emerging from the forest around their camp, a family of unicorns, whose horns gleamed with pearl-like luminescence, their presence making the very air feel cleaner and more alive. A delegation of elder druids whose connection to the natural world was so complete. They seemed to be part of the forest itself, even a small group of what appeared to be angels, their wings folded against their backs as they approached with reverent caution. This is impossible, Imbara whispered, watching as beings she had only heard described in the most ancient dragon legends, gathered around their small campfire. Guardian magic hasn't existed for over 1,000 years. How can my awakening have called to so many? Because the awakening isn't yours alone, replied a new voice, and everyone turned to see a figure that made even the angels step back in automatic deference. The woman who approached seemed to be made of starlight and silver flame, her presence radiating power that felt older than the mountains themselves. Lady Celestini. Periel breathed, dropping to one knee in a gesture of submission that was echoed by every other supernatural being present. We did not expect the Hysrof herself to answer the call. Celestini smiled, and the expression seemed to illuminate the entire clearing with gentle radiance. When the Silver Guardian awakens, when the last of the first people reveals herself, when ancient magic returns to heal the wounds that have festered for millennia. Even the heavens take notice. She moved to stand before Umbara, her starlight, eyes studying the dragon with intensity that felt both comforting and overwhelming. You have spent your life believing yourself corrupted, different, wrong. But your magic is exactly what it was meant to be. The silver fire is the original dragon flame. The power that built rather than destroyed, that unified rather than conquered. But why me? Umbara asked, struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening around her. Why now? I'm just an exiled princess who couldn't fit into her own people's expectations. Because sometimes the most important gifts come to those who understand suffering, Maya said with wisdom that seemed far too mature for her 7 years. Because someone who has been rejected knows how precious acceptance truly is. Because the silver fire chose someone who would use it to heal rather than to rule. Celestini nodded approvingly at the child's words. The first people were always wise beyond their years. Maya carries the last pure bloodline, the final key needed to restore the ancient bonds between all supernatural species. Together, you represent hope for a future where cooperation replaces competition, where different kinds of power work in harmony rather than opposition. Lord Malakar knows this as well, Periel interjected grimly. His attack today was merely reconnaissance. He will return with greater force, and his goal remains the same, to corrupt the awakening magic for his own purposes. The mention of the vampire lord sent protective fire through Umbara's system, her silver flames responding to the threat against Maya with intensity. That surprised everyone present, but this wasn't the destructive fury that traditional dragons would have produced. This was guardian magic at its purest, power dedicated entirely to shielding the innocent from harm. Let him come, Umbara said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the very air around them resonate with determination. He wants to use Maya's blood and my fire to bind supernatural beings under his control, but he doesn't understand that guardian magic can't be perverted or corrupted. It transforms everything it touches into something better. The ritual he plans would indeed bind supernatural beings. Celestini confirmed with grave concern, but not under his control. Properly performed with pure bloodline and silver fire, it would create connections between species that haven't existed since the Age of Legends. The question is whether those connections will be forged through love or fear, cooperation or domination. A new voice interrupted their conversation, coming from the sky above as a massive dragon descended toward their clearing. Umbara's heart clenched with recognition and old pain, as she identified the approaching figure as her father, King Valdris the Mighty, accompanied by what appeared to be the entire Dragon Council. So, Valdris said as he landed and resumed human form, his presence radiating the kind of authority that had made him the most feared dragon ruler in centuries. My exiled daughter believes she can restore magic that we abandoned for good reason. Father, Umbara replied, rising to face the dragons who had cast her out just days before. You have no authority here. I am beyond dragon lands, beyond your judgment, beyond your fear of anything that challenges your narrow understanding of power. I have authority wherever dragons fly, Valdris countered, though his voice carried less certainty than usual. And what I see here threatens the order we have maintained for centuries. These alliances, these connections between species will lead only to chaos and conflict. Elder Koroth stepped forward, his ancient features twisted with the same prejudice that had driven Umbara's exile. The girl carries dangerous bloodline, and your magic has clearly been corrupted by contact with lesser beings. Return with us now. Submit to cleansing rituals, and perhaps the damage can be contained. The casual dismissal of Maya as a dangerous bloodline and the suggestion that her magic needed cleansing sent rage through Umbara. That made her silver fire blaze like a newborn star. But before she could respond, Maya herself stepped forward with courage that seemed impossible for someone her age. You're afraid, the child said simply, her young voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. You're afraid that if different kinds of magic work together, if dragons aren't the strongest anymore, then you won't matter. But being strongest isn't the same as being best. The wisdom in her words, delivered with the innocent honesty that only children possessed, sent shock waves through the assembled dragons. Several council members exchanged uncertain glances, as if seeing their prejudices reflected through Maya's eyes had made them question assumptions they had never examined. "Enough," Valdris declared, though his voice carried notes of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "Embara, you will return with us. The girl will be placed in protective custody where her bloodline can be properly monitored. This gathering will disperse immediately." "No," Embara said quietly, but her words carried power that made the very ground beneath them tremble with response. "I will not return to a kingdom that values fear over wisdom. Maya will not be imprisoned for carrying gifts that could heal the world. And this gathering will continue until every supernatural being who chooses cooperation over conquest has been heard." The silver fire that erupted from her declaration wasn't directed at the Dragon Council, but it surrounded them nonetheless, offering transformation rather than destruction. For just a moment, Valdris and his council found themselves experiencing magic the way it was meant to be, as a force for healing, protection, and unity rather than domination and separation. "Choose," Embara said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally embraced her true purpose. "Stand with us and help build a future where all beings can thrive together, or return to your isolated kingdom and watch as the world changes without you. But understand that either way, the age of dragon supremacy is ending. The age of cooperation is about to begin." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of wind through the trees and the distant call of night birds. But in that silence, everyone present could feel the weight of destiny balancing on the edge of choice, waiting to see whether fear or hope would shape the supernatural world's future. Subscribe to our channel to witness the incredible decision that will reshape the supernatural world forever. Will the Dragon Council choose wisdom over tradition? What happens when Maya's true power is fully revealed? Don't miss the epic finale. Hit that subscribe button now. 6 months had passed since that pivotal night in the forest clearing, and the supernatural world had been transformed in ways that even the most optimistic prophecies had never dared predict. The valley that had once been Embara's temporary refuge had grown into something unprecedented. A city where dragons soared alongside phoenixes, where unicorns grazed in meadows tended by druids, where angels walked streets paved with stones. Blessed by every species working in harmony, the Council of Unity, as it had come to be known, met in a great hall carved from living crystal that reflected the light of every kind of magic practiced within its walls. Representatives from dozens of supernatural species gathered regularly to address disputes, coordinate responses to threats, and plan initiatives that benefited all rather than privileging any single group. At the center of it all sat Embara, though the title she bore now had nothing to do with her abandoned dragon heritage. She was the Silver Guardian, keeper of the ancient bonds, protector of the innocent, and queen not through conquest, but through the unanimous recognition of beings who had experienced her magic's power to transform and heal. "The reports from the Eastern Territories are encouraging," announced Elder Moonscale, a dragon who had chosen to abandon the isolation of the traditional kingdoms in favor of cooperative governance. 3 more packs of shadow creatures have been successfully converted rather than destroyed, their corruption healed through guardian magic. Embara nodded approvingly, her silver fire pulsing with satisfaction at news that violence had been replaced with transformation, and the integration programs proceeding beyond all expectations, replied Sage Willowbark, whose druidic connection to the natural world had proven invaluable in helping different species find compatible ways of living together. Young beings from all backgrounds are learning to work with magics they once feared, building friendships that will define the next generation's approach to supernatural cooperation. The most remarkable success had been with Maya, who at 8 years old had become something unprecedented, a bridge between species, whose natural empathy allowed her to facilitate understanding between beings who had been enemies. For centuries, her presence in any negotiation seemed to awaken the best qualities in everyone involved, making compromise not just possible but genuinely desired. "Maya," Embara said, turning to the child who sat beside her in a specially crafted chair that accommodated her small stature while acknowledging her crucial role in the council's work. The Phoenix Archives have requested another consultation about the restoration rituals. Are you feeling up to helping them today? Maya smiled with the radiant joy that had become her trademark, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm for work that would have overwhelmed most adults. I love helping with the rituals. Every time we restore one of the old connections, I can feel the world getting a little bit brighter. The restoration rituals were perhaps the most important work being done in the new era. Using knowledge recovered from ancient archives and guided by Maya's intuitive understanding of First People magic, they had successfully re-established communication. Channels between species that had been severed for millennia. Dragons could once again speak directly with unicorns. Phoenixes could share their wisdom with angels. And humans with the right bloodlines could serve as interpreters for beings whose languages had no common ground. Your Majesty interrupted. A voice from the chamber's entrance, and everyone turned to see a figure that sent shock waves through the assembled council. King Valdris stood in the doorway, but he was not alone. Behind him came a delegation that included not just the Dragon Council, but representatives from every major supernatural kingdom that had initially resisted the unity movement. Father, Embara said carefully, rising from her crystal throne with dignity that spoke of hard-won confidence. This is unexpected. I thought you had made your position clear regarding our work here. Valdris stepped forward, and for the first time in Embara's memory, the mighty Dragon King looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. I came to apologize, he said, his voice carrying across the great hall with humility that stunned everyone present. 6 months ago, I let fear and pride blind me to what you were truly offering. I called your magic corrupted when it was actually pure. Labeled your vision dangerous when it was exactly what our world needed. He gestured to the delegation behind him, dragons and other beings who had initially opposed the unity movement with varying degrees of hostility. We have spent these months watching your city grow, observing the changes you've brought to territories that welcomed your guidance. What we've seen has forced us to confront truths we've spent centuries avoiding. Elder Korath, looking older than his ancient years but somehow more peaceful, stepped forward to add his own voice to Valdris's words. The prosperity, the cooperation, the absence of the conflicts that have plagued our peoples for millennia. It's undeniable. Guardian magic doesn't corrupt or weaken. It strengthens everything it touches by helping beings become the best versions of themselves. More importantly, added Queen Seralina of the Phoenix Courts, her molten gold aura creating dancing patterns of light throughout the crystal chamber. We've realized that isolation isn't protection, it's stagnation. Our peoples have been diminishing for centuries because we've refused the connections that give magic its true power. Embara felt tears gathering in her eyes as she realized what this moment represented. Not just reconciliation with the family that had rejected her, but acknowledgement from the entire supernatural establishment that cooperation was stronger than competition, that unity was more powerful than supremacy. What are you asking of us? She said gently, her voice carrying none of the triumph or vindication that might have been expected from someone so thoroughly vindicated. We're asking to join you, Valdris replied simply, to formally dissolve the barriers between kingdoms and species, to commit ourselves fully to the vision you and Maya have made reality. We're asking you to be not just the Silver Guardian, but the Queen of all supernatural peoples. The request sent shock waves through the assembled council, many of whom exchanged glances that spoke of hope mixed with careful caution. The idea of formal unity between all supernatural species was the ultimate goal of their movement, but achieving it so completely had seemed like a distant dream rather than an immediate possibility. The kingdoms are willing to surrender their independence? Asked Lady Celestini, who had become Embara's closest advisor in matters requiring divine perspective. Not surrender, Queen Seralina corrected with a smile that seemed to warm the entire chamber. Transform. We're proposing to become regions within a larger realm, maintaining our cultural identities while sharing governance and resources for the benefit of all. Maya looked up at Imbara with eyes that sparkled with ancient wisdom and childlike excitement. "This is what grandmother saw in her dreams," she said with quiet certainty. "All the peoples working together, all the magic flowing in harmony, all the old wounds finally healed." Imbara looked round the great hall at faces that represented centuries of conflict and mistrust, now unified in hope for a future none of them could have imagined alone. The silver fire in her chest burned with recognition of destiny finally being claimed, purpose finally being fulfilled. "Then let us begin," she said, her voice carrying power that seemed to resonate with the magical foundations of reality itself. "Let us build a realm where every being can flourish, where every gift is valued, where every voice is heard. Let us prove that the greatest magic of all is the courage to trust each other." The ceremony that followed would be remembered as the most significant moment in supernatural history, as representatives from every species came forward to formally pledge their peoples to the new unified realm. Silver fire flowed from Imbara to touch each delegation, creating bonds that would endure for generations. Maya's role in the ceremony was perhaps the most moving aspect of the entire proceedings. As the last of the first people, she served as the living connection between past and future, her blood carrying memories of what had been and her presence promising what could be again. When the final pledge had been made and the last bond forged, Imbara found herself wearing a crown that had materialized from pure magic itself, silver crystal, that seemed to contain stars, shaped by the collective will of every being who had chosen cooperation over conflict. Queen Imbara Drakeburn, proclaimed Lady Celestini, with divine authority that made the very air sing with approval, first ruler of the united supernatural realm, keeper of the ancient bonds, guardian of all peoples. As cheers erupted throughout the crystal hall, and magical light poured from every surface in celebration, Imbara reflected on the journey that had brought her from rejected princess to beloved queen. The magic that had once marked her as corrupted and wrong had proven to be exactly what the world needed most: the power to heal rather than harm, to unite rather than divide, to transform fear into love. The rejected dragon queen had found her true throne at last, not through conquest or inheritance, but through the simple act of choosing compassion over pride, understanding over judgment, hope over fear. 1 year later, Maya would officially become Imbara's adopted daughter and heir, her 8th birthday celebrated throughout the realm as the anniversary of supernatural unity. The lost girl who had been saved by a dragon's kindness had grown into the bridge between worlds, proof that sometimes the most important destinies begin with the smallest acts of love. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey from rejection to redemption, from exile to enthronement. If this story of finding your true purpose by embracing what makes you different touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales that prove our greatest strengths often come disguised as our deepest differences. Share the story with someone who needs to remember that being rejected by the wrong people can lead to being accepted by the right ones. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell to never miss our latest magical adventures.